This is the story of the one. He's responsible for keeping a leading healthcare facility clean and safe. And he trusts Grainger's high-quality HVAC cleaning and safety products, combined with their world-class supply chain, to consistently deliver, ensuring he's covered inside and out, so he can focus on keeping his facility clean to help protect the health of everyone inside. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Have you ever thought about what would happen if your airline window popped out? Or if you could build a jetpack using only machine guns? Turns out you can, but you really shouldn't. Hi, I'm Jill Chacha, host of a podcast that's for weird people who like learning about weird stuff. It's called Well, That's Interesting, and it's a comedy science-y show that tells the story behind the facts because, as it turns out, those stories are funny. The facts are bizarre, the stories are epic, and the laughter is plentiful. So, join the flock and listen to Well, That's Interesting wherever you do podcasts.
Hey everyone, Ray here. Many of you are familiar with the incredible story of the Dunkirk civilian mobilization during World War II. But there's another remarkable story of a civilian-led maritime operation where Denmark ferried thousands of their Jewish citizens to safety in a mass-scale rescue right under the noses of the Nazis. From award-winning author Tim Brady, A Light in the Northern Sea, Denmark's incredible rescue of their Jewish citizens during World War II meticulously explores this nationwide resistance movement that reads like a thriller. Denmark's nearly 8,000 Jews survived, but it wasn't a miracle. It was the combined achievement of a nation refusing to stand by, using clever subterfuge and increasingly daring acts of sabotage. Among the rescued was Niels Bohr, the world-famous nuclear physicist who went on to help Oppenheimer build the bomb at Los Alamos. Publishers Weekly calls this book illuminating an inspiring and suspenseful history that showcases grassroots efforts to stand up to tyranny. A Light in the Northern Sea from Kensington Books is available everywhere books are sold, and you can learn more at tim-brady.com. Hello, and thank you for listening to The History of World War II podcast, episode 557, French Pride versus American Resolve. Last time, the Eastern and Central Task Forces of Operation Torch had made landfall. Admiral Darlan, the de facto Vichy leader, as he held several posts, agreed to turn over the city of Algiers, while the amphibious invasion of Oran, after some hiccups, was proceeding along. But its biggest landing of Allied troops to the east of the city was about to run into serious obstacles, certainly the Allied aircraft, which would be going in first. Waiting for their turn to debark was the 16th and 18th Regimental Combat Teams, or RCTs, of Major General Terry Allen's U.S. 1st Infantry Division, and while they waited, the men listened to the radio, to the Army Notre Dame game. As the sun rose on November 8, 1942, 8 Albacores from the carrier Furious and 12 Sea Hurricanes from Dasher and Bitter rose up toward the city of Valmy, located in between the airfields of La Sania and Terferawi, due south of Oran. The idea was to drop propaganda leaflets to avoid additional fighting. After dropping these pieces of paper, the aircraft then turned north to make for La Sania. No harm in showing the flag in the form of fighters. But the harm came quickly enough as French DW-250 fighters engaged the American warbirds. The DW-250 is an older aircraft, but respectable enough. Proving this, the French took out 3 Albacores. Still, 6 250-pound bombs dropped on empty hangars below. Not exactly a fair trade, but the pilots did not know the hangars were unoccupied. Then the Allied pilots recovered and shot down 5 of the French fighters. As the French AA fire was still giving the Albacores and Sea Hurricanes trouble, 10 Seafires from the carrier Furious showed up and strafed the French AA positions, silencing them. Then they landed at La Sania and Terferawi. The Seafires, the naval version of the Supermarine Spitfire fighters, headed back to the Furious. Now that French air power over La Cenia was silenced, it was time to expand this air dominance. So later that day, the British, keeping a strong air presence, engaged and destroyed a French bomber over Mers el-Kabir along the west coast of the Gulf of Oran, just northwest of Oran. And then they destroyed 4 more French fighters. Meanwhile, the Allied ground forces to the east of Oran were coming ashore. Lieutenant Colonel William Darby's Anglo-American command was split into 2 forces to better achieve that day's objectives. Darby would have his 1st Rangers and Task Force Red, and the latter would be led by Brigadier General Lunsford Oliver. The first half, the Rangers of 2 companies, now aboard landing craft, were headed for the Arzway harbor to the northeast of Oran, just on the far side of a land bulge. They would go in first and secure objectives for the later landing Task Force Red. Landing as quietly and as quickly as possible, the 2 closest French guards on patrol were taken down. The invading soldiers came ashore and secured Fort de la Pointe on the northern side of Arzway. The first objective had been taken. Darby himself led the 2nd and larger detachment of 4 companies. His objective was more pertinent to the Allied ships that would be bringing men ashore. There, at Cap Carbon, on the northern tip of the bulge, above the Azu port, was Fort du Nord, which had 4 105mm guns. That had to be taken for the coming landings to succeed. Fortunately, the Anglo-American Special Forces approached the guns unawares. At first, they had achieved this by landing just southeast of Cape Cabon, scaled the cliffs there, and then came in behind the guns that were pointing seaward, as were the men manning those guns. As the Ranger Battalion made their charge, they were supported by 81mm mortars. The French, surprised, went to the ground to save themselves from the explosions, which gave Darby and his enough time to secure the guns. But there was resistance, resulting in 2 Allied troops killed, with 8 more wounded. Still, the guns that most worried the Royal Navy and the men aboard the transports were silenced, as was the northern end of Port Azu. At 4 a.m., Darby sent up a green flare to let those at sea know the Azu batteries were theirs. While the American and British elite troops had been securing the guns and the northern part of Azu, Colonel Cheadle's 16th RCT of 5,608 men had landed at the easternmost beaches designated Z White and Z Red at 1 a.m. The plan was for most of these men to head west towards Oran and clear the beaches of enemy units. They started doing this despite being attacked by light French forces. Task Force Red now could land with little trouble. But just to finish off this area, for now, some of Cheadle's men were to actually head east, away from Oran, along the coast, to secure the city of La Macta. It would take them hours to get there, but when they did, it was the Allies who fell into an ambush. Yet they had an ace up their sleeve. Taking fire but keeping their heads down, they called in the HMS Farndale, and her guns opened up on the attackers. Now it was the French troops with their heads down. The Americans would take the town at 1:30 p.m. Yet, if they thought this area was secure, they were mistaken. Backing up to 1:20 a.m., Colonel Greer's 7,092-strong 18th RCT started making landfall at Arzu's Beach Z Green. They were the right flank of the landings closest to Arzu itself, but as covered, the Ranger battalions had already been there. Greer's men rushed in and stormed the French barracks. Inside were now 62 prisoners. At 6 a.m., Major General Allen started his journey to the beach, and wanting things wrapped up nice and tidy for their commanding officer, U.S. troops smashed their way into Arzu's town hall and terrified the mayor into surrendering. In a moment of irony, these Americans were helped by Edgar Hamilton, an American captain in the Foreign Legion, who chose this moment to defect. He then gave the invaders valuable information. Next, the 3rd Battalion of the 18th Regiment Combat Team came ashore and captured the Arzew Naval Base that had 13 seaplanes, full of fuel, armed with torpedoes, ready to go. An Allied naval disaster had just been avoided. This left the 1st Battalion of 18th RCT free to go inland towards St. Cloud, close to the coast, but not quite halfway to Oran. But before reaching St. Cloud, the 1st Battalion was stopped by 5 French armored cars and infantry. The battalion brought forward its 37mm anti-tank guns and destroyed the Vichy impediments. But if they thought the fight for St. Cloud was over, the Americans were very much mistaken. Around noon, these men of the 18th RCT tried to close in on St. Cloud, but at least 400 French troops appeared in their path. Between this force and a Foreign Legion battalion with 14 75mm guns, 4 37mm guns, 4 60mm mortars, 8 heavy and 15 light machine guns, the Americans were more than stopped in their tracks. The Allied timetable was threatened. The Americans tried again, but were stopped now, having casualties to deal with. Even worse, French 75mm and 155mm to the northwest of this town also started firing on these Allied troops. The 2nd Battalion of the 18th RCT was brought up to assist, and with them was the 105mm assault guns of the 18th Cannon Company. The American guns went off. Its men charged forward again at 3:30 p.m., only to be pushed back again. Nothing else for it. The 3rd Battalion of the RCT now moved up. A third attack was planned for 7 a.m. November 9th. For now, the men needed to rest and take care of their wounded. But again, the Allied plan was messed up. Only at 4 a.m. did Brigadier General Oliver's 4,772-strong Task Force Red land at Beach Z Red to the east, as to not clog up the beaches. But right away, they came under fire from an enemy battery at St. Lou to their left, practically beside where the Americans landed. Still, by 7:59 a.m., the task force was on land, and then a flying column of M3 Stewards and armored infantry, led by General Patton's son-in-law, Lieutenant Colonel John Waters, broke off and left the beach at 8:35 a.m. Having the stewards and keeping the gas pedal pressed down, the flying column worked their way through light resistance and avoided the troublesome St. Cloud, then made their way and attacked the Tefarawi airfield just after 11 a.m. The airfield was taken, along with a recently arrived ammunition train, but then bombers from La Sania attacked the now American-controlled Tefarawi. Fortunately, this was called in, and Royal Navy fighters rushed in and chased away the bombers, shooting down 4 of them, but losing 1 of their own. By 4 p.m., 26 Spitfires of the United States Army Air Force 31st Fighter Group landed at Tefarawi from Gibraltar. When Lieutenant Colonel Raff of the Parachute Infantry Regiment heard that Tefarawi was theirs, despite the cock-up of his unit's journey, he ordered his C-47s to land there. But on their way there, enemy fighters from La Sania intercepted them, and several transports were destroyed. The remaining C-47s then made their way onto Tefarawi, but passed within range of French 75mm guns from nearby hills. More aircraft were lost. As it grew dark, there was only 14 C-47s left of the original 39 to land where they were needed. As of RAF's 556 men, now that number was down to 300. When Lieutenant Colonel Waters of the flying column that had just taken Tefarawi airfield heard about the French 75 guns, he knew his drive further north to La Sania would be suicide, as it came close to this French position. So he waited. This gave the majority of Task Force Red time to catch up to him at the airfield. So when Waters did leave for La Sania at 6 a.m., now November 9th, He was reinforced. But if the Americans thought that things were well in hand for the morrow, they were sadly mistaken and would spend November 9th fighting just as hard to keep what they had. As the sun rose on Oran that November 9th, the Allies, mostly Americans, were checked more or less in several locations. To the west of Oran, at Les Andelus, or Beach Y, Brigadier General Roosevelt's 26th RCT was fighting towards Mers el-Kabir, but having to take on heavy French artillery and at least 600 enemy troops. Meanwhile, to the southeast of all this fighting, at St. Lucian, about 7 miles southeast of the Tafarawi airfield, that town was now being counterattacked by French armor, which meant that only an Allied reinforced tank company was heading to La Sania, though it should have been more, but even then they were being fired upon by French 75s. The rest of the Red Flying Column had to turn around and to protect Tafaria, just in case St. Lucian was lost. Although St. Lucian was not a major city in the area, it had to be dealt with first, as only a victory there would allow all the Allied forces to then focus on Oran without having to worry about their rear. Thus, during the early afternoon of November 9th, 1st Armored Company B, plus a platoon of 3M 75mm GCM tank destroyers, left Tafarawiya, heading towards St. Lucian. The fighting there was intense, but relatively short. The Americans showed up and destroyed 14 French light tanks, losing one of their own, an M3 Stewart and one M3 GMC. This then allowed the Americans at Tafarawiya to turn northward and finally go secure Oran once they got there, which is when the Naval Fire Support Officer contacted the ground troops saying there was serious trouble to the far east of the Azu landing sites. What had happened was that the 1st Battalion, 16th RCT, which had taken La Manta, was now surrounded themselves by French infantry, as those Allied troops were protecting the left or western flank of the main landing zone. This was an issue of the First Order. The French force that now surrounded the 1st 16th had snuck into position during the night. Who knew what they planned for the coming darkness? So the commanders of Center Task Force went into overdrive in preparing to remove this problem that held up everything else. Those surrounded were told, help coming, tanks, engineers, bombers, Spitfires. But all this organizing took time, maybe too much time. Could it be done before darkness? Who knew? For now, it was decided to have Spitfires and bombers strafe and bomb the French while the men trapped inside also engaged the enemy. And whether from just offering a face-saving gesture or truly being overwhelmed, the French backed off after the air and ground attacks. The rushing reinforcements were called off. This allowed Lieutenant Colonel John Todd's Green Flying Column from Task Force Green to keep moving towards La Sania airfield, which was taken at 10 a.m. the next morning. The bad news was that most of the French planes based there had already left. The worst news was that 75mm batteries at nearby Valmy, south of La Sania, began shelling the enemy occupying forces. That is, until a detachment was sent to silence them that evening, which they did. During the morning of November 9th, Colonel Robinette's Task Force Green, coming from the west, minus Todd's flying column, reached Missignan, itself to the west of La Sania, above the Salt Lake. Problem was, the French dominated Missignan with machine gun bunkers, armored cars, and a 75mm battery. Still, Robinette's orders were to get past Missignan as the Allies were building up forces to approach Oran from the south and end this fight. Robinette knew he did not have enough infantry to take on this French position, so waited till dark to go around it to the south. The task force waited, moved out, but before anyone realized it, they found themselves in the muddy Sepka de Oran Salt Lake. But it was passable. Good to know. Meanwhile, one of the task forces coming from the east, Colonel Greer's 18th RCT, had reached St. Cloud, again halfway between the beach landings and Oran, but ran into stiff French resistance. Not wanting to be the one task force that did not help take Oran, Greer planned a rather devastating artillery attack, followed up by a charge of his 3 infantry battalions. But Major General Allen got wind of this and thought of the resulting civilian casualties, so put a stop to it. Instead, the 1st Battalion, 18th RCT, would engage the French defenders, keeping them busy, while the 2nd and 3rd of the 18th would swing around that night. This seemed likely to work, so Allen's commanders, looking to what was next, started planning their attack on Oran. Step 1 was to get the RCTs into place to attack. All 3 battalions of Roosevelt's 26th RCT would station themselves just northwest of Oran as they were coming from that direction. Yes, they had to battle their way there, but their situation was improving, and they should be in place at the designated time. To the east of Oran, the 5 battalions of the 16th and 18th RCTs would also get into position. This left task forces Green and Red to come at Oran from the south, and they would be providing the armored thrust. During the night of November 9th through the 10th, the men of the 16th and 18th RCTs moved into place. The 2nd and 3rd Battalion, 16th RCT, moved close enough to take St. Eugene, just to the southeast of Oran, clearing out that troubled spot. Meanwhile, to the far east, trucks were bringing the 1st of the 16th RCT from La Mata to join the Battle of Oran. But going back to the 18th RTC's 2nd and 3rd Battalions that had bypassed St. Cloud, while the 1st Battalion tied down the French there, these 2 units ran into other French forces, starting up new, unexpected clashes. In fact, these 2 battalions would not arrive in time for the attack on Oran. The commander's plans were already unraveling. Another problem for the attack on Oran came from Valmy, again located in between La Sania and Teferawi airfields, due south of Oran. The French machine guns and 75mm battery still held out at Valmy, and if the 2 task forces were going to be in place in time to apply southern pressure on Oran, Valmy had to be neutralized. The men of the 2 task forces attacked Valmy. It wasn't going well. The casualties started piling up, but the city remained defiant. Then Allied naval strikes were called in. This started up. The French kept their heads down. The task forces moved in. Valmy was eventually taken. By 9 a.m. November 10th, the truly exhausted men of the task forces were in place. Infantry units from the 1st Armored Division started entering Oran. Everything was quiet. Too quiet. No one was shooting at them. But not looking a gift horse in the mouth, the armored columns, which followed the infantry in, went right for General of Division Boissou's headquarters. The port and other vital locations were also seized. Seeing this fortunate turn of events, General Allen canceled the coming artillery and air attacks. Boissou and Vice Admiral Riou were convinced to start negotiating, seeing that only Oran and a few holdouts were left. The formal surrender came at 12:30 p.m. Fighting continued throughout the day outside of Oran, specifically St. Cloud, still delivering punishment to the Allies, was the last city to surrender, and only on Boissou's orders. The Center Task Force had accomplished its mission, but at a price. The Allies suffered 1,189 casualties, of which 593 were killed or missing, while the French lost 347 men killed or missing, with another 350 wounded. Next time, we'll cover the Western Task Force, as its object was French Morocco, with its population of 6.3 million souls. It had, as natural defenses, a punishing surf and mountains. It would be General Patton's objective to take Casablanca of 257,000 people. The planners of Torch described it as half Arabian, half European, and half Hollywood. Greetings, everyone, from Central Virginia. So I just want to thank those latest members who are helping support the show, and they get anywhere from 3 to 4 extra episodes a month. So let's see here. We have Allison Hall from Arizona. Thank you very much, Allison. Howard Winter from New Jersey. Howard, thank you very much. And last but not least, Bram Van Shore from Grembergen, Belgium. Thank you all very much. So we got one more to go. We have the far western, of course, Patton, the Americans, French Morocco. You got Casablanca, all the cool stuff. Anyways, but this is a big one because, again, 6 million people. So we will get to that next time. And then we will get the Allied forces moving east towards Tunisia.
Hello, this is Matt from the Explorers Podcast. I want to invite you to join me on the voyages and journeys of the most famous explorers in the history of the world. These are the thrilling and captivating stories of Magellan, Shackleton, Lewis and Clark, and so many other famous and not so famous adventurers from throughout history. Go to explorerspodcast.com or just look us up on your podcast app. That's the Explorers Podcast.
From the creators of the popular science show with millions of YouTube subscribers comes the Minute Earth podcast. Every episode of the show dives deep into a science question you might not even know you had. But once you hear the answer, you'll want to share it with everyone you know. Why do rivers curve? Why did the T-Rex have such tiny arms? And why do so many more kids need glasses now than they used to? Spoiler alert, it isn't screen time. Our team of scientists digs into the research and breaks it down into a short, entertaining explanation, jam-packed with science facts and terrible puns. Subscribe to Minute Earth wherever you like to listen.